Welcome. Today is Monday, the 24th of November, and we're talking number of the day. It is 1 billion. Rofhiwa, it had to be linked to the G20, right? We've just come out of that.
Absolutely, Francis. So Minister Patricia, the Minister of Tourism, indicating that the spin-off from the G20 is 1 billion rand for the Gauteng government. So you'll remember there were about 130 meetings across the country throughout the year, and this obviously created some revenue for the different economies in the different provinces. But for Gauteng in particular, a significant number, 1 billion rand, which is the early estimate of what would have come out of the G20 meetings.
Which is wonderful because more tourism, business tourism, hopefully this leads to people coming back. Although they didn't like the weather last week, but at least there was some sun. But the tourism benefits are there. And then what about the bigger business benefits? I saw the finance minister saying, oh no, this is a global forum. It's not South Africa linked. But he did admit that some of the themes addressed by the G20 are important for South Africa.
And there were a number of those themes that were addressed by the different world leaders in the G20 summit, those including climate change. They included the integration of AI and digitization of governments. And the big talking point there, Francis, was how do we get the funding to make sure that Africa, as an example, is able to get on board with the different discussions and the different implementations, because that's the big thing that we're lacking at the moment is the financing. And there was a huge talk about moving away from getting debt to fund the different projects and rather raising investment through different means. And those were some of the big talking points that came out of there. But you also got to speak to some business leaders during the B20, which preceded the main event on the weekend. And I'm curious to know what they had to say about some of these big talking points.
So exactly what you raised. South Africa is fortunate because our debt is mostly denominated in rand. Mm-hmm. So for the other African countries who are just drowning in debt and it's global debt, maybe these talks are more important. But we are trying to do things, and they had the task forces, the B20, that gives recommendations to the G20. Looking at the just energy transition, that is hugely important for us as we move away from coal. So some recommendations there, and maybe if everybody agrees that that's important, and they did, and climate change on the final declaration, then that could free up more funding for our just energy transition. So those are the spin-offs that I guess we can't calculate right now, but they could come in the future. And very interesting, for example, the FNB CEO, he said, he raised an important point that business is done by people. So maybe they will come to South Africa, these business people for the B20, and they could be pleasantly surprised. And they're like, oh, I like my hotel. The infrastructure in Johannesburg is better than I thought. And that could lead to investment decisions down the line. That could lead to more business. And of course, then you have business people also mingling and swapping their business cards. And maybe that'll lead to investment as well.
And that's important, Francis, because investment ultimately leads to economic growth. Mm-hmm. And once we start to see economic growth, we start to see jobs being created. And that is one of the big crises in South Africa, is the lack of jobs. So the movement of investment into economic growth, into creating jobs, is something that could benefit South Africa greatly. And so, like you say, the exchanging of business cards, the engagements with different business leaders is hugely important.
So it didn't improve the rand, but of course there's a lot going on globally. And that is the number of the day, 1 billion rand. Hopefully it's even bigger in terms of the real economic spin-offs of the G20.